Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Universal Peace Federation. My name is Ray LaPalkin. Our topic today is the role of religion and peace studies in the peace-building process. And before we get to that, though, I'd like to read a little bit about the Universal Peace Federation. The Universal Peace Federation, UPF, is an international and interreligious network of individuals and organizations, including representatives from religion, government, civil society, and the private sector. It's dedicated to achieving world peace. An NGO in general consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the UN, UPF supports the work of the United Nations, particularly in the areas of interfaith peace building, peace education, and the strengthening of marriage and family. There are many critical challenges facing our world at this time, from poverty and climate change to conflict and inequality. At the same time, the rise of civil society initiatives and the expansion of Track 2 diplomatic efforts involving people-to-people relations provides new dynamics that can complement and support the work of governments in their search for the solutions to our world's most pressing problems. UPF has developed a strong track record of accomplishment. Our commitment to service, partnership, and cooperation are hallmarks of our work. Through forums, seminars, conferences, service programs, and interfaith peace initiatives, UPF is building a global network of peace builders to contribute to a world of sustainable peace in which everyone can live in freedom, harmony, cooperation, and prosperity. And our three kind of mantras or mottos are interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. So I had mentioned earlier our program today is the role of religion and peace studies, and what we're going to be doing is watching a webinar that we had recently, and it featured Dr. Thomas Ward, who is the former president of the Unification Theological Seminary, and he's the current provost of the Peace Studies program there at this time. So please enjoy the webinar.
Our next speaker is Dr. Thomas Ward, and as Dr. Walsh said, he's a current provost of the Unification Theological Seminary, and he was its immediate past president. He also serves now as a professor of this Peace and Development Studies program. Prior to that, he's got a lot of experience in academia. He's 18 years as Dean of the University of Bridgeport's College of Public and International Affairs, where he taught graduate courses on culture and development, peace and conflict studies, and political and economic integration. He has also a worldwide scope of action. He lived and worked in the US, Europe, Latin America, East Asia. He lectures in English, French, and Spanish, and has a working knowledge of several other European and Asian languages. He has been a Fulbright Scholar, a Taiwan Foreign Ministry Research Fellow, guest lecturer at the Beijing Academy of Social Science and at Academia Sinica's Institute of Modern History in Taipei, Taiwan. Dr. Ward has authored or edited more than 10 books, including March to Moscow, The Role of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and the Collapse of Communism, and has published numerous other articles worldwide. He earned his doctorate at the De La Salle University. And here is my dear brother, Dr. Ward. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berg, for your kind invitation to participate in today's program. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate the fact that we're joined here today by Dr. Jenkins, who I know has also been so pivotal to the organization of not just today's conference, but so many of the wonderful conferences that he hosts on a weekly basis for UPF here in the United States. So my gratitude to both of you as we start. I also feel very privileged to be able to be here today with my president, Dr. Thomas Walsh, and also my professor, Lynn Walsh, because she's part of the provost domain, so to speak, even though she's Dr. Walsh's wife. And she's really a wonderful professor. And actually her field of study is counseling And counseling is fundamental to the peace studies. Let me just mention that. I will be speaking on the topic, likewise, as Dr. Walsh has begun, on peace studies, religion, Korean reunification. And I think already through Dr. Walsh's presentation, we've seen the pivotal role that religion plays. We all know the role that religion plays. I mean, religion is what allows us to have self-control, self-discipline, it defines our values, and it really serves as the vehicle, if we can follow those principles and norms, to be able to relate properly to those who surround us and to be able to promote a more peaceful world and be able to negotiate as one needs to do in order to maintain peace. So I'd like to begin. I'd like to also share a few slides, actually a few more than Dr. Walsh, but I will try to go through them as quickly as possible so that I also can respect the time that has been given me and give plenty of time for Professor Walsh to respond. So Korean reunification, the role of religion and peace studies. First of all, I just want to say how excited we are because through Dr. Walsh's presidency, he brings so many years of skill working in the international field. How many people do you know who've traveled in 120 countries? How many people do you know who have been involved in addressing conflict-related issues in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia? How many people do you know who literally met scores and scores of heads of state and had a chance to interface with them? This is such a rich component, as I said, for us to be able to have at UTS at this time. And we also are very excited by the fact that Professor Walsh is also going to be among those who are teaching in our Peace Studies program at UTS. As I said, really fundamental, and I think we'll get on that a little bit in my presentation here, fundamental to peace studies is counseling, person-to-person relations. That's where it all begins. And that's where finally peace needs to begin there. It has to begin in that interface between individuals. So I'm going to touch a little bit upon Korean reunification and I think a unique take on Korean reunification. Most people, when they think of Korean reunification, they might think in terms of, well, in the future, Korea can be a neutral power. It can find itself between China and the emerging so-called Quad of the United States, Korea, Japan, and China, which surround China and can be able to serve as the basis to kind of hopefully encourage China to move in a democratic direction. Others see the future of Korean reunification as Korea being Finlandized, in the sense that Korea's foreign policy and things in the future will be controlled by the People's Republic of China simply because of its geographical proximity to mainland China. And others have the hope that Korea will survive and flourish as a liberal democracy. But from the lens of religion to start, I want to look at Korean reunification a little bit differently, if you will, and consider how religion and peace studies contribute to the conversation on Korean reunification. Religion, as I've already suggested, and as Dr. Walsh has elaborated, recognizes human limitations, and it also provides living examples of how to go beyond those limitations. And it's often said that religion is the basis of culture, and that culture is the basis of the social and legal framework of any given society. And so the norm, it doesn't matter where you go, is if you want to change the laws, you must first change the culture. A lot of the dramatic transformations that have occurred in America over the past couple of decades are directly connected to the fact that cultural values have changed, that central appreciations have shifted. And because of that, it has resulted now in some rather dramatic changes in terms of the way in which the law views a whole variety of things, including marriage, including even when does life begin for a child. All of these issues, they stem from a transformation of our cultural values. When we look at the United States, there were religious values at the very base of our country. And it was the commitment of America's founders that what they wanted to do as they put together that remarkable document of the Constitution was to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. blessings of liberty. They understood that this liberty didn't just come from them, that liberty somehow had a divine origin. And they also understood that the liberty was not just for them, but was meant to be able to carry on into the future. So they had that kind of a vision. And amazingly, if we consider the preamble to the Charter of the United Nations, it actually reads somewhat similarly. There were also a series of concerns about the future to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. They weren't just thinking about themselves. They were thinking about the future and the way in which things would go in the future. And they also wished to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. And although they don't say it here, we know that those fundamental human rights, they stem essentially from the Western value system. And fundamentally, it goes back to the Judeo-Christian tradition about the great value of human life. And also the call for tolerance and living together in peace with one another as good neighbors. This is not about these ideals that we see in the US Constitution or that we see in the Charter of the United Nations. These are not about whether or not Korea will be Finlandized, or whether or not Korea will be a constitutional democracy, or even about whether or not Korea will serve as a buffer between the East and the West. These are defining values which go far beyond those other issues, and are indeed must be the foundation of any discussion on the reunification of Korea. The United Nations, I think we're all aware, really was inspired by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had this incredible dream of the United Nations. And where did that dream come from? Well, it's not a stretch to say that United Nations sounds an awful lot like United States. And it was Roosevelt's expectation that somehow the ideals, the things that he believed in the United States, that they could hopefully eventually be expanded to a worldwide level through the United Nations. The kinds of values and ideals, they could be also encoded within the UN, so that the American worldview could be able to be applied on a much broader scale through the institution of the United Nations. Nevertheless, John Adams, and I believe that this applies not just to the US Constitution, but also to the UN. John Adams said, "We have no government armed with the power which is capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion." It's dangerous if we don't have religion which somehow guides oneself to be able to control passions, to be able to subscribe to a moral code. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. So he was so clear about this point and about the central role that religion was meant to play in governance. So, as I said, these three alternatives that are often discussed about the future of Korea, in some sense, I think it's safe to say that they are irrelevant. That's not where we should be looking at as the future of Korea. But we have to go deeper than that if we think about what's going to guide Korea. If Korea is to really be able to become like an endpoint where people around the world realize that this is the one unification that really is a defining one, a country divided in half. It's a defining one. It's kind of symbolic of the incredible divided world that we went throughout the 20th century. And this is like the final resolution of that in so many respects. And the UPF view about Korean reunification, I believe, is a much deeper view than whether or not we're going to go the way of neutrality or a Finlandized state or a liberal democracy. It looks at those fundamental issues about interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. Universal values, those values that are found in all the great religions. And interdependence, recognizing if we really depend upon each other, we have to learn to get along with each other. And peace studies is a discipline where one learns how to do that. And mutual prosperity, how is it that we take the steps to build a more just world? Because that is a part and parcel of the whole process of bringing about peace. One of the founding fathers of modern peace studies, Johan Galtung, he often speaks about the idea of negative peace versus positive peace. And positive peace is a peace which addresses the fundamental injustices that exist because of this inequality that one finds in so many parts of the world, and even amongst and between countries. So to conclude, I'd like to turn my attention to what really is a central theme. Dr. Walsh and I were speaking just yesterday with a scholar who's going to be speaking to our faculty on peace studies, and he brought up what's referred to as the curve of conflict. And the curve of conflict provides so many lessons, and it is a defining point. I think it's called Lund's curve. Michael Lund, who is associated with the United States Institute of Peace, actually is responsible for this curve. And it's a very, very deep curve. And I believe it really serves kind of as a roadmap and invites reflection upon not just nations and nation relations, but also to human relations. There are different levels of peace in this curve. There's something called durable peace. Durable peace, I see that we have Franco Famolaro and Robert Duffy on our audience today. It's the kind of relationship that exists between the United States and Canada. Both of them, by the way, are Canadians. God bless them. That durable peace means even though we don't always agree, there are so many things that we share in common that somehow it's very difficult to break apart Canada and the United States. We are really bound at the hip. And then there's something known as stable peace. And stable peace is another kind of peace. It's a peace where there's a whole variety of things where you can engage a certain country, but you know that there are certain things that you cannot engage that country about. For example, in terms of US-China relations, there are all types of things that we can talk about concerning trade. But we certainly know that if we begin to talk about Taiwan and share the American view versus the Chinese view, immediately that stable peace is going to be destabilized, and we're going to move into the realm of an unstable peace. An unstable peace, that might be such as the relationship that exists between the United States and Iran. And in that type of relationship, there's something that you cannot not talk about. When the United States and Iran sit down and start to talk, the United States wants absolutely to talk about the presence of nuclear weapons and the potential of that developing in Iran. And Iran wants to speak about the relationship that exists between the United States and Israel. Immediately, there is going to be tension there. And they cannot but argue between each other. And all of that leads to a crisis, what we saw for many months, for example, between Ukraine and Russia, and finally, which culminated, as we know, in a war. So this is the curve of conflict. This is the various levels at which conflict exists amongst nations. And at each level, there are certain types of things that need to be done in order to be able to address conflict and provide solutions. But what I want to talk about today is I just want to invite us to recognize that the curve of conflict, it's not just about the relationship from one nation to another. It's also about the relationship that exists amongst human beings. The relationships that exist within a family, even, for example. Between a husband and wife, is there a durable peace? Even though they may differ about all different kinds of things, is there something which is strong enough that always is able to bring them back together again? Or is it a stable peace where husband and wife, they can talk about all kinds of things, but they know that there are certain things that they can't talk about because as soon as they do, suddenly whatever communication or resonance was there, it begins to fall apart. Or unstable peace where husband and wife, each time they see each other, there is some fundamental issue that exists so that every time that they see each other, immediately it breaks out into dispute. And that ultimately leads to a crisis. And who suffers in those crises? Obviously, the children. And ultimately, we know tragically, the culmination of this type of conflict in the family is, of course, divorce, which is where things end. So my point is that humanity is in search of lasting peace. And also Korea is in search of lasting peace. If you come to UTS and you study, by the way, we have our Doctor of Ministry has a special concentration in peace and justice. Our Master of Arts in Religious Studies program has a whole program in interfaith peace building. And we have a new Master of Arts in Peace Studies. If you take any of our Peace Studies courses, you will discover that there are so many different types of skills, both skills that we learned from the great religious traditions, the skills that we find were exhibited by people like Gandhi in terms of bringing about, can you imagine the independence of India? He was able to liberate hundreds of millions of people through the vehicle of nonviolence. Or if you know about Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the Muslim gentleman who worked together with Gandhi, who also played a key role in likewise engaging the Islam of his time in a nonviolent approach. Dr. Martin Luther King, those of you from the Philippines, the EDSA revolution, all of those in search of a lasting peace. We know that religion informs that, but also peace studies as a social science informs that. Not just the Lund's curve, but there's so many other concepts. What leverage does each side have in a conflict? What is the point of rightness when both sides begin to see it would be better to be at a negotiating table rather than disputing with each other? We look at all those different types of things in our peace curriculum at Unification Theological Seminary. So quite simply, if we look at Korea in the future, I believe that on your right column there, you see the values that are outlined in the United Nations. Never forget that the United Nations is responsible for South Korea's ability to preserve its democracy when they made that solemn decision more than half a century ago to somehow stand up for Korea at a time when it needed great support. And so it's important, and I think that's a component. Those ideals that are embodied there in that preamble should be a part of the future Korea. Korea must be based not on simply a political model or a political or economic alliance. If it is to last and become an example, I believe that Korean reunification must take into account universal values that the people within the Koreas can be able to identify with and resonate with. Interdependence, so that people can be able to recognize the value of all types of relations amongst individuals, and mutual prosperity, so that all people can be able to work together to be able to create a more prosperous globe. So those are some of the fundamental issues I wanted to touch upon. And as I said, I believe that both religion and peace studies, I think Dr. Walsh and I both have been trying to show, and through these presentations, they make an incredible difference in terms of really advancing Korean reunification. And I thank you, Dr. Berg, for pointing that also in your introduction to your written introduction to today's session. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Again, Dr. Ward has many years in researching on different kinds of the peace study program at the seminary, and he studied abroad and lived abroad as well. And we focus a lot on the Korean Peninsula because we really feel that Korean Peninsula is a key to solving a lot of other global issues. So in summarizing our program today, again, the answer we really feel is in Godism and religious studies to emphasize these peace-building efforts that we're doing throughout the world. Again, we're promoting interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. So if this resonates with you, please get in touch with us. And as always, I always like to promote the co-founders, Reverend Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, their autobiography. So if anybody is interested in a complimentary copy, please get in touch with me and I'll get one out to you. So thank you for joining us today.